On May 27, 1968, at 3:17 a.m. in the freezing depths of the North Atlantic, 400 miles southwest of the Azores, the nuclear-powered attack submarine USS Scorpion is gliding silently at 300 feet. 99 men are carrying out their duties with the mechanical precision of highly trained sailors, unaware that they will never again see the light of day. Commander Francis Slattery, a 37-year-old veteran with 15 years of submarine service, stands in the control room studying the navigation charts, his face lit by the bluish glow of the instruments. Scorpion is heading home to Norfolk after a 3-month Mediterranean deployment, carrying classified intelligence and a weary crew dreaming of their families. In the engine room, the turbines purr with their familiar hypnotic rhythm. In the crew's quarters, men sleep in narrow bunks, lulled by the steady vibration of the hull. No one knows that exactly 140 seconds from now a chain of catastrophic events will turn this submarine into a metal tomb, trigger the largest search operation in naval history, and by one of the cruelest ironies imaginable, produce a discovery that will revolutionize submarine warfare for decades to come. 11,000 kilometers away, inside the listening room of the Soviet naval base at Severomorsk, above the Arctic Circle, 24-year-old sonar operator Viktor Leonov adjusts his headphones in almost total darkness. His fingers move across the dials with the ease of a virtuoso pianist, filtering the endless sounds of the ocean, the distant rumble of merchant ships, the clicking of pistol shrimp, the mournful songs of humpback whales migrating north. Leonov belongs to a new generation of Soviet sonar operators trained under Admiral Sergei Gorshkov's program to counter American acoustic superiority. Unlike traditional operators who listened passively, Leonov was taught to hunt anomalies, silences, the absence of sound that betrays an enemy submarine. His commanding officer, Captain Yuri Petrov, a stern man who survived the K-19 reactor disaster in 1961, had drilled it into him 1,000 times. "The Americans don't make noise, Victor, they create voids in the ocean. Learn to hear what isn't there." That night, surrounded by the constant low hum of the listening room, Leonov has no idea he is about to become the accidental witness to a tragedy that will alter the course of the Cold War and redefine the rules of underwater warfare. The disappearance of USS Scorpion was not an isolated accident. It was the deadly climax of an underwater arms race that reached its peak in 1968. Since 1945, the United States and the Soviet Union had been waging a silent war beneath the oceans, each trying to dominate what military strategists called the three-dimensional battle space. Nuclear submarines, able to remain submerged for months and strike any target on the planet with ballistic missiles, had become the ultimate deterrent. But that power came at a terrible price. Between 1960 and 1968, 4 nuclear submarines had already been lost. USS Thresher in 1963, taking 129 men to the bottom off Cape Cod. The French submarine Minerve in January 1968 vanished in the Mediterranean with 52 sailors. The Israeli submarine Dakar also lost in January 1968 with 69 men, and now Scorpion. Every loss was a human tragedy and a technological mystery neither superpower could afford to ignore. The families demanded answers. Admirals demanded explanations. Engineers, faced with proof that their creations were not infallible, desperately tried to understand what turned these technological marvels into death traps. What no one realized in the days after Scorpion vanished was that the key to understanding the disaster lay not in Pentagon war rooms, not in naval engineering labs, not even in survivors' testimonies. There were none. The truth rested in acoustic recordings captured by a young Soviet sonar operator, who in the darkness of his listening station, heard something no one had ever heard before: the precise sound of a nuclear submarine dying at 10,000 feet. That discovery, born of pure chance and obsessive attention to detail, would become one of the Cold War's most valuable intelligence assets, and forever change how nations design, build, and operate their submarine fleets. Viktor Leonov was not a typical product of the Soviet military elite. Born in 1944 in Murmansk, the wind-battered Arctic port where the sun disappears for 2 months every winter, he grew up in the shadow of destroyers and submarines heading out into the North Atlantic. His father, a fisherman, froze to death in a Barents Sea storm when Victor was 12. His mother, a fish canning factory worker, raised him alone in a 2-room communal apartment shared with 2 other families. At school, he was an average student in maths and science, but he possessed one extraordinary gift: perfect pitch. He could identify a ship's class just by the sound of her engines, distinguish a Norwegian trawler from a Soviet cargo ship, recognize the acoustic signature of a diesel submarine 2 kilometers away. At 17, when Navy recruiters visited his technical high school looking for candidates for the new acoustic warfare program, his music teacher insisted he take the test. The officers were skeptical of the thin, hollow-eyed boy who had dropped out of music school at 15, but when they ran the sound identification trials, Viktor scored 47 out of 47, correctly nomming submarines, surface ships, even marine creatures. 6 months later, he was at the Higher Naval School in Leningrad, learning not just to listen but to interpret the secret language of the sea. Soviet sonar training in 1968 was brutal and unforgiving. While the Americans relied on advanced technology like the SOSUS hydrophone arrays strung across the ocean floor, the Soviets had to compensate for their technological lag with human excellence. Instructors locked recruits in listening rooms for 12-hour shifts, forcing them to identify thousands of recordings, until every acoustic signature was etched into memory. They learned to tell sturgeon-class boats from skipjacks by the whine of their reactor coolant pumps, to detect the subtle cavitation of seven-bladed American propellers. But above all, they were taught to hunt anomalies. Leonov excelled at this. Where others looked for sounds, he looked for silence. He developed a controversial theory. The quietest American submarines could not be detected by their direct noise but by the disturbances they created in the natural acoustic environment, driving fish away, disrupting thermal currents, absorbing ambient sound. His instructors mocked it as acoustic metaphysics, yet it became Leonov's obsession. He spent nights replaying tapes, searching for those silent voids that betrayed a hidden presence. On May 22, 1968, 5 days before Scorpion's loss, tensions between the superpowers reached a critical level. In the Mediterranean, the U.S. Sixth Fleet and the Soviet Mediterranean Squadron were watching each other with barely contained hostility. 3 days earlier, the Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-129 had sunk in mysterious circumstances in the Pacific with 98 men aboard, and rumors of a collision with an American submarine were circulating in the Kremlin. USS Scorpion, operating in the area, received orders to shadow a group of Soviet ships near the Canary Islands before returning to Norfolk. That routine surveillance mission would be her last. In Severomorsk, Viktor Leonov was part of the team tracking NATO submarines across the North Atlantic. Orders were clear: locate, track, record. Every night he put on his headphones and immersed himself in the ocean's soundscape, filtering noise, hunting enemy signatures. On the night of May 27, he noticed something unusual on Channel 7, the frequency reserved for acoustic anomalies. A series of short, violent sounds followed by total silence, not the normal quiet of the ocean but an absolute acoustic void, as if a section of the Atlantic had ceased to exist. He increased gain, stripped away interference, and there, buried in the background, was a sequence that froze his blood. A muffled explosion followed by a series of metallic cracks, then a long, fatting roar that dwindled into nothingness. Leonov pulled off his headphones, hands shaking. He had heard underwater explosions before, exercise torpedoes, depth charges, but never anything like this. The sound had a massive, resonant quality, something enormous collapsing under crushing pressure. He checked the coordinates from the coastal hydrophone network: 33 degrees N, 34 degrees W, about 400 miles southwest of the Azores. He called Captain Petrov. Petrov listened to the tape 3 times, then picked up the red phone linked directly to Northern Fleet headquarters. Within hours, Leonov's recording was climbing the Soviet chain of command all the way to Admiral Gorshkov in Moscow. Acoustic analysts confirmed Leonov's suspicion. They had captured the sound of a submarine imploding under water pressure. But which submarine? The Soviets had no units in that area. By sheer extraordinary chance, Leonov had recorded the death of an American boat. The tape was classified at the highest level and never shared with the Americans. Instead, it became the cornerstone of an acoustic research program that would transform the Soviet Navy and, in turn, force the United States to completely rethink submarine warfare. Meanwhile, in Norfolk, Virginia, the families of Scorpion's crew waited on the pier. The submarine had been due the morning of the 27th. By noon, she was overdue. By 6 p.m., she was officially missing. By midnight, the largest search in naval history was launched: 37 ships, 13 submarines, dozens of aircraft. For 5 months, search teams combed the Atlantic with side-scan sonar, underwater cameras, manned deep submersibles. They found nothing. The ocean had swallowed Scorpion without a trace. Theories multiplied: collision with a Soviet submarine, reactor failure, internal explosion, sabotage. Every hypothesis was examined, debated, discarded. The U.S. Navy, for all its resources, was powerless against the mystery. What the Americans did not know was that the Soviets, thanks to Leonov's tape, held 2 decisive advantages. They knew the approximate location of the wreck, and far more importantly, they possessed the complete acoustic record of the destruction sequence. Analyzed frame by frame, that recording revealed details the Americans would only confirm months later when they finally located the wreck using a still-secret SOSUS network that was not declassified until 1991. The Soviet acoustic analysis of Leonov's 91-second recording painted a chilling 3-act tragedy. Act 1, an initial moderate explosion, almost certainly in the torpedo section. Analysts identified the signature of a Mark 37 torpedo whose lithium perchlorate battery was known to be unstable. Act 2, structural breakup noises as the pressure hull began to fail. The metallic cracking followed patterns that exposed fatal weak points in the skipjack-class design. Act 3, the final implosion as the submarine passed crush depth and the hull collapsed instantly under 400 atmospheres. That last low roar fading into total silence became the object of obsessive study. Soviet engineers built mathematical models of the collapse, tested different steels, experimented with alternative hull designs. What emerged was a revolutionary understanding of nuclear submarine vulnerability. In their pursuit of speed and stealth, the Americans had sacrificed structural strength. Their hulls, optimized for low hydrodynamic drag and low noise, were paradoxically more fragile than heavier, noisier, but structurally tougher Soviet designs. Viktor Leonov became a quiet legend in Soviet military circles. Promoted to lieutenant at 24, awarded the Order of the Red Star, he was transferred to the Moscow Acoustic Research Institute and put in charge of a new program called Phantom Listener. Its goal: train operators who could not only detect enemy submarines but diagnose their structural weaknesses from acoustic signatures alone. Scorpion's death tape became the central training tool. Recruits spent hundreds of hours listening to it, breaking it down, memorizing every crack and groan. They learned the exact stress points on every American class, the dangerous resonance frequencies, the true maximum operating depths. Instead of trying to match American technology, the Soviets developed asymmetric tactics: force U.S. boats deep, make them maneuver violently, push them to the edge of structural failure. Leonov's recording leveled the technological playing field and forced the Americans to completely rewrite their submarine doctrine. It was not until October 1968, 5 months after the disappearance, that the Americans finally located Scorpion. The oceanographic research ship Mizar, using revolutionary side-scan sonar, detected an anomaly on the seabed at 10,000 feet. Photographs from a towed camera revealed total devastation. The hull broken into several sections, debris scattered over 400 meters, the reactor intact but surrounded by collapsed structures. The official inquiry pointed to a torpedo malfunction as the probable cause, but the real lessons remained classified for decades. What the inquiry quietly revealed to a small circle of admirals and engineers was that the entire skipjack class suffered systemic structural weaknesses: HY-80 steel developing microfractures after repeated deep dives, unstable lithium perchlorate torpedo batteries, reactor vibrations that slowly weakened surrounding structure. All these flaws, identified from the wreck, triggered a complete redesign of American submarines. Only after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 did the Americans learn that the Soviets had known everything from day one. Declassified KGB archives revealed Leonov's recording and its enormous impact on Soviet naval doctrine. For more than 20 years, every Soviet attack submarine patrolling the Atlantic carried a copy of that tape and a manual detailing every acoustic and structural vulnerability of U.S. boats. That intelligence asymmetry explained numerous mysterious Cold War incidents. American submarines suddenly forced to surface after being harassed with tactics that targeted specific weak points, collisions that appeared designed to induce structural stress, cat-and-mouse games in which the Soviets displayed uncanny knowledge of exactly how far they could push an American hull. In 1975, the U.S. Navy launched SUBSAFE-2, a complete overhaul of submarine safety protocols. Every nuclear submarine received new internal acoustic monitoring systems that continuously recorded the hull's own sounds. Sophisticated algorithms analyzed those recordings for microfractures, hull deformation, vibration anomalies before they became catastrophic. Lithium perchlorate batteries were replaced with safer silver oxide systems. Hulls were strengthened with HY-100 steel capable of withstanding 30% higher pressure. Operational depth limits were reduced by 20%, sacrificing performance for safety. Officially, these changes were credited to lessons from the wreck. In reality, they were a direct response to Soviet tactics that, unknown to the public, had been exploiting flaws Leonov identified the night Scorpion died. Leonov himself lived a discreet but influential life. Promoted to commander at 32, he headed the underwater acoustics department at the Leningrad Naval Research Institute until his retirement in 1989. His technical contributions remained classified, but his influence shaped every subsequent generation of Soviet sonar operators. He summed up his philosophy in one sentence: "The ocean never lies, but you have to learn its language." When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, he was 47. He turned down lucrative Western consulting offers and returned to Murmansk, where he opened a small music school for children. For 15 years he taught piano and ear training, never once mentioning his military past. His former pupils remember a patient man obsessed with acoustic precision who told them, "Listen not just to what is played but to the silences between the notes. That's where the truth lives." He died in 2006 at the age of 62 from lung cancer, taking with him secrets that even military historians still struggle to fully reconstruct. In 2008, 40 years after the tragedy, the U.S. Navy held a memorial ceremony in Norfolk. Surviving family members gathered before a black granite memorial engraved with the names of the lost. Admiral Gary Ruffud, Chief of Naval Operations, gave a somber speech acknowledging that the sacrifice of Scorpion was not in vain, for it led to fundamental improvements in submarine safety that have saved countless lives since. What he did not and could not say was that those improvements were driven not only by the tragedy itself but by a decades-long acoustic shadow war in which the enemy held a decisive intelligence advantage. The full story only began to emerge in 2012 with the publication of a book by a former Soviet naval intelligence officer revealing Leonov's recording and its impact. The revelation sparked heated debate in American military circles. Some accused intelligence of failing to detect the asymmetry. Others pointed out the cruel paradox. Soviet exploitation of the disaster ultimately forced the U.S. to build safer submarines. Today, in 2025, the legacy of Viktor Leonov and USS Scorpion permeates every aspect of modern submarine warfare. New generation submarines, American and Russian alike, are equipped with autonomous structural acoustic monitoring systems that continuously record and analyze thousands of sound parameters. AI algorithms trained on decades of recordings, including Scorpion's, detect structural anomalies with a precision Leonov could only have dreamed of. Disaster simulations used to train crews reproduce with chilling accuracy the acoustic sequence captured that May night in 1968. Naval academies worldwide teach Scorpion not as a simple accident, but as a case study in the intersection of technology, human error, and the inherent fragility of complex systems operating in hostile environments. Leonov's recording, declassified by Russian authorities in 2018 and made available to international researchers, has become an invaluable teaching tool for underwater acoustics engineers. Its exceptional quality, despite 1968 technology, testifies to the skill of Soviet operators and the sophistication of their hydrophone networks. But beyond the technical and military aspects, the story of Viktor Leonov and Scorpion raises a deeper question about innovation in times of crisis. Leonov did not invent new technology or revolutionary algorithms. He simply listened with obsessive attention and recognized the importance of what he heard. His discovery, like Tommy Lusson's during the Battle of the Atlantic 25 years earlier, illustrates a fundamental principle. In critical moments, careful observation and the courage to act on intuition often matter more than massive technological investment. The Soviets, despite their technological lag, turned a tragic accident into strategic advantage through the insight of one young sonar operator who understood that every sound tells a story, and sometimes the most important stories are the ones of destruction. USS Scorpion still lies at 10,000 feet beneath the Atlantic, her broken hull a tomb for 99 men whose families still await complete answers. The sealed reactor will emit faint radiation for centuries to come, a silent reminder of the dangers of submarine warfare. Scientific expeditions periodically visit the wreck, documenting its gradual decay and collecting biological samples to study how marine life colonizes metal structures. Every dive reveals new details, but also new questions. In 2019, an expedition led by explorer Viktor Leonov produced the most detailed images ever captured of the wreck using high-definition cameras and multibeam sonar. Those images, analyzed by naval engineers, confirmed Leonov's original analysis: an initial torpedo room explosion, followed by progressive structural failure, and finally a catastrophic implosion that crushed the hull like an empty tin can. The families, now mostly elderly widows and grandchildren, still gather every May 27 to honor their loved ones. Some cling to the faint hope that new evidence will reveal exactly what happened in those final terrifying minutes. Others made their peace long ago, accepting that some truths will remain forever buried under 3 kilometers of salt water. What makes the story of Scorpion and Viktor Leonov particularly haunting is the belated realization that the disaster could have been prevented. Declassified archives show that as early as 1966, 2 years before the loss, U.S. Navy engineers had identified potential problems with the Mark 37 torpedo's lithium perchlorate batteries. Laboratory tests showed they could ignite spontaneously at high temperature and humidity. An internal report recommended immediate replacement across the fleet, but the report was buried in bureaucracy. The estimated $18 million cost was deemed too high. Budget priorities went to new weapons and more visible modernization programs. The defective batteries stayed in service. Scorpion sailed on her final patrol carrying exactly the type of munitions engineers had flagged as dangerous. That institutional negligence cost 99 lives and, ironically, ended up costing far more than battery replacement ever would have when you add the search operation, the inquiry, family compensation, and the complete fleet redesign that followed. Viktor Leonov known those details, he would likely have felt profound bitterness. In the few interviews he gave after the Soviet collapse, always on condition of anonymity, he expressed a haunting regret at having helped turn a human tragedy into military advantage. "I heard 99 men die," he told one researcher in 2003. "Every time I played that tape to train new operators, I didn't hear acoustic data, I heard silent screams. The Americans call their sailors heroes. We used their deaths as a training tool. There is something deeply immoral in that, even if it was necessary to protect our own country." That moral tension between patriotic duty and basic humanity haunted Leonov until the end. Colleagues say he refused alcohol because it amplified the sounds in his head and he could still hear the roar of Scorpion's implosion decades later. The human dimension is often overshadowed by technical and strategic discussion, yet it may be the most important part. In Scorpion's final 90 seconds after the initial torpedo explosion, 99 men experienced terror we can only imagine. Experts estimate the crew had about 90 seconds before the hull gave way. In those 90 seconds they knew. They knew their boat was doomed, that pumps couldn't stop the flooding, that controls were gone, that the pressure outside would crush them like an eggshell. Some prayed. Some thought of families, of children they would never see grow up, of wives they had kissed goodbye for the last time. The youngest sailors, barely out of their teens, may have called for their mothers. The officers, trained to stay calm, probably kept giving orders even when they knew it was hopeless, because that is what leaders do, maintain the illusion of control until the very end. And then when the hull finally failed, the implosion was instantaneous. 200 atmospheres compressed the air inside to thousands of degrees for a fraction of a second. Death was faster than the brain's ability to register pain. It is a small consolation, but the only one we can offer the families. In the years that followed, several family members became obsessed with understanding exactly what happened. Barbara Foley, widow of electrician Joseph Foley, spent 30 years collecting declassified documents, interviewing submarine experts, corresponding with naval engineers. She built a private archive of more than 15,000 pages. Her goal was not lawsuits or compensation. She simply wanted to know. "My husband died doing his duty," she said in a 1998 interview. "I don't blame anyone for his death, but I have the right to know why and how he died, what happened in those last minutes. The Navy owes me at least that truth." Her quest finally paid off in 2012 when a declassified report confirmed the torpedo explosion theory. She died in 2017 at 89, having received the answers she had sought for half a century. Leonov's discovery has had an incalculable impact on modern naval doctrine. Today, every nuclear submarine in the world, American, Russian, Chinese, British, or French, carries structural acoustic monitoring systems directly descended from the lessons of Scorpion. Networks of sensors distributed throughout the hull continuously listen to the boat's own sounds. Machine learning algorithms trained on decades of recordings, including Scorpion's, detect patterns that precede catastrophic failure. When a sensor picks up a propagating microfracture, an abnormal resonance, or an unusual vibration, alarms trigger instantly and the crew can take corrective action. Since these systems became widespread in the mid-1980s, the U.S. Navy has lost no nuclear submarines to non-combat causes. The same is true for most major navies. The rare disasters that still occur, like the Russian Kursk in 2000, are caused by explosions so massive that no monitoring system could have prevented them. Perhaps Leonov's deepest legacy is philosophical. His human-centered approach to acoustic warfare influenced generations of military thinkers. Admiral James Stavridis, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, wrote in 2015, "In a world obsessed with satellites, drones, cyberweapons, and artificial intelligence, it is easy to forget that human senses, properly trained and applied with discipline, remain our best intelligence tools." Viktor Leonov's story reminds us that technology is only an amplifier of human capability, never a substitute. Machines can capture data, but only humans can understand what the data means in the larger context. In 2018, exactly 50 years after the disaster, the US and Russian navies held an unprecedented joint ceremony. Wreaths were laid simultaneously in Norfolk and beside Leonov's grave in Murmansk in memory of all Cold War submariners lost at sea. U.S. Chief of Naval Operations Admiral John Richardson gave a remarkable speech. "For decades we regarded the Soviets and later the Russians as adversaries, and they were. But we were also all sailors facing the same dangers, the same merciless ocean, the same laws of physics that respect no flag. Viktor Leonov heard our men die and used that knowledge to protect his own. We cannot blame him for that, it was his duty. But today we recognize that his discovery, by forcing both sides to improve submarine safety, ultimately saved lives on both sides." That may be the only positive outcome of this tragedy, that the death of 99 Americans led to innovations that now protect submariners all over the world, whatever their nationality. The wreck of Scorpion is now a protected war grave. Acoustic beacons on the seabed warn ships and submarines to keep their distance. Periodic scientific expeditions monitor structural integrity and radiation levels. In 2021, marine biologists discovered the wreck has become an artificial reef hosting astonishing biodiversity. Some family members find poetic comfort in that. The machine of war has become a sanctuary for the sea life their loved ones admired. Today, the story of Viktor Leonov and USS Scorpion is taught in naval academies worldwide as a multidimensional case study. Technical failures, intelligence breakthroughs, ethical dilemmas, psychological stress, and the shared human experience of sailors facing the same indifferent ocean. If Leonov were alive today, he would be 81. One imagines he would watch the evolution of submarine warfare with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Modern submarines are infinitely quieter and more sophisticated than those of his era, yet they still follow the fundamental principles he helped establish. Listen not only to what is there, but to what is absent. Trust human intuition even when machines suggest otherwise. In moments of crisis, this story tells us, it is not always the most advanced technology or the grandest strategy that makes the difference. Sometimes it is simply one person paying fierce attention, noticing what everyone else ignores and having the courage to act on it. Viktor Leonov did not choose to witness a tragedy. He was just doing his job, listening to the ocean night after night. But when he heard something that didn't belong, he refused to dismiss it as noise. He recorded it, reported it, and set in motion a chain of events that changed submarine warfare forever. The men of USS Scorpion did not die in vain. Their unintended sacrifice exposed weaknesses that could have claimed many more boats and crews. The safety improvements implemented after the disaster have, by Navy estimates, prevented at least a dozen potential losses in the decades since. Thousands of submariners have come home to their families because the lessons of Scorpion made their boats safer. It is a modest consolation for the widows and orphans, but it is real. The men of Scorpion died doing their duty, and even in death they continued to protect their shipmates. That may be the truest definition of heroism. And Viktor Leonov, the young sonar operator who heard their death and made something meaningful of it, deserves recognition too, not as an enemy who exploited a tragedy, but as a consummate professional whose unintended consequence was to help make the ocean safer for every submariner regardless of flag. In his final years, he expressed the hope that history would judge him not for giving his country a strategic edge, but for the lives his discovery ultimately saved. That is the judgment we should remember. Beyond ideologies, beyond flags, beyond even national loyalties, there are deeper principles: careful observation, the courage to trust one's convictions, and the recognition that even in the darkest circumstances we can find lessons that make us all stronger, wiser, and ultimately more human. The ocean in its implacable indifference makes no distinction between American and Soviet submarines, between heroes and victims, between victors and vanquished. It enforces its laws on everyone equally, and those who survive are the ones who learn to listen with humility and respect. Viktor Leonov understood that fundamental truth, and that is why his legacy endures long after the Cold War that shaped him. In 2025, as new geopolitical tensions rise and the oceans once again become arenas of strategic competition, the story of Scorpion and Leonov remains profoundly relevant. Naval academies still play that 91-second recording to new classes, not just to teach acoustic signatures, but to make them sit with what it means to hear 99 men die, and to carry the moral weight of turning that knowledge into something that protects life rather than merely gaining advantage. The ocean guards its secrets jealously, but sometimes it reveals truths that change history. On May 27, 1968, 99 men perished in a disaster that could have remained an impenetrable mystery. Instead, because a young Soviet sonar operator thousands of miles away listened carefully, their deaths became a catalyst for change that has saved countless lives in the decades since. That is the legacy of Scorpion. That is the legacy of Viktor Leonov. And it is a lesson that still echoes today. In an ever more complex and technological world, the simplest human qualities, attention, courage, humility before the unknown, remain our most precious assets. Machines can listen, but only humans can truly hear, and sometimes what we hear changes everything.